Hello from Hemmingford, Quebec, everybody. I'm David Smith, Data Smith on Lichess, and welcome to more content from the Hemmingford Chess Club. Tonight is going to be, I guess, our last round report for the current tournament, which is the Hemmingford Chess Club Championship, inaugural version 2024. And even though there's still a few games to play in the last round in sections A and B, we have pretty much the winners determined. In section A, Nils, a newcomer to the HCC scene, has basically run away with the section. He's got a last round bye, but he's got 5.5 out of 6 points going into the round, so there's nobody that can really catch him. In section B, Lifts sometimes, Paul, otherwise known as, is going to win that section unless he loses his last round game and some complicated combination of other players winning and losing allow somebody to catch him. But a draw will give him clear first. And in the sections C and D, excuse me, we had two winners with perfect scores. Colin, otherwise known as Falstan, in section C with 5-0, and Julian, our youngest player, in section D with 5-0 as well. Now, of course, modesty prevents me from talking about my results, but I'd just like to point out, nevertheless, that I had a perfect score too. Unblemished by a single win or draw. I had 4 straight losses in the games that I played. So congratulations to all the winners. I personally enjoyed the tournament, even though the results weren't necessarily there, and I hope all of you did too. So this evening, we're talking to Gus, otherwise known as Sauerbomb on Lichess, and a longtime participant in HCC events. And he's going to basically give us a tour of a game that he's going to share with us. But just first off, Gus, give us a little bit of background on who you are chess-wise and otherwise for that matter.
Okay. Well, my name's Gus. I started playing chess about 6 years ago, and I guess I got into it because um, I'm 25, so whenever I was 19. So I guess I got into it to like play with my family because my brother and my dad would play chess, and so I wanted to participate in that, and so I got into it, and I really enjoyed it, and so I've just been playing chess ever since. And it started off as a hobby, but now I am, well, I mean, relatively still a hobbyist, but I do lessons as well, and do that about part-time. So I have about like 12 or so students, and I also coach a middle school club, which is a lot of fun and a lot of pain, but they do pretty well. And I was really happy that we ended up taking second at our state championship
Oh, nice.
last semester. So our state championship is coming up soon in March. So we'll see how we do this year. But yeah, so uh, I have, kind of turned it into something a little bit more time consuming, if you can believe it. And yeah, I enjoy it a lot though. Um,
So you learned as an adult?
yes, well, I mean, I knew the moves, but I probably played maybe a game a year up until, yeah, I was like 19, and then I started playing it really quite ravenously. And I mostly just started off with correspondence games, um, and then I probably played my first tournament. I don't know what year, but I would guess like 2 years into me playing. So I maybe 2019 I think was I played my first tournament in.
Right. And do you have a study regime or a coach or anything like that?
Yeah, I do have a coach. His name is Nicholas Van der Not. He's a national master from South Africa, and if you look him up, Nicholas Van der Not, you'll be able to find him. And he's really fantastic. And in fact, I think he coaches somebody else in the club as well. And normally I do have a study regime, although I haven't really been following it very much of late. Whenever I'm doing it also kind of depends, on how much time I have. But a big part of it is game analysis. So I try to do a lot of analyzing my own games, and I have a whole library of chess books that I have like barely begun to scratch the surface of. I'm sure like most chess players.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and I try to do some like puzzles, but probably somewhere around at the height, the most I was probably ever doing was like including like tournaments. Because I actually was taking it very seriously, so I would like track the amount of hours that I was studying chess and spending playing chess games, and as long as it's serious, I don't count like blitz. And at the height of it, I was doing somewhere around like on average, probably like 20, 25 hours a week of chess studying. And then now I'm not doing nearly that. I'm lucky if I get like 10. Uh, but part of that is also um, is that I've started playing Texas Hold'em for fun,
Oh,
and that has kind of captured some of my interests. So
yeah, yeah,
it's taken away from my chess studies. Um, I'm really enjoying that. I've gotten a couple books on that. So um, but yeah, so nowadays, I mean, like I said, I'm lucky if I get in 10 hours a week, it's like, wow, I did really good this week. Did
yeah,
so
yeah.
great. And so most of that is tactics and stuff.
Right, right. So between Texas Hold'em and chess, is there time for anything else, like a job or a school or anything like that?
Yeah, so actually I was uh yeah, I'm doing like chess teaching part-time, and I was teaching in as an assistant teacher at a school. I'm actually looking for a part-time job currently, and I have a wife, Julia, who I've been married to for 3 years, and no kids. But yeah, so I'm looking for a job, looking for a job, part-time job, because that's it's a little bit of a difficulty because I really really enjoy teaching
Yeah,
chess and running the club that I'm running, and so it's very important to me that I find some sort of
something.
something that I'm going to be able to work around
Right,
that
exactly.
with.
Yeah,
Um, so to supplement it. But ideally, if I could, get one or two more clubs under me and some more students, then I would be doing chess 100% full time.
yeah, yeah.
But
Very cool.
yeah.
Very cool. All right. So, do you teach any adults? So, like, if I needed help, would you?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I actually, in fact, probably about 50% of my client base is adults. Um, and I do a lot of lessons online. So I have, students all over the place. Mostly, I don't have any actually international now that I think about it. So you could be the first one, David. But yeah, about 50-50 really.
Right.
So yes. So if you're feeling the need, you can send me a message on Leechess Sauerbomb.
I will do so.
Um, yeah,
Okay,
but
great.
okay.
So, speaking of teaching, you're going to teach us something tonight, I assume. You're going to show us a position
Well,
or a game. So we flip over to
yeah,
that.
okay, sure.
Okay, so we're looking at
Yeah, so
your game against Galdiv.
you're right. And I'm debating about whether I should take it from the top or from the middle. But perhaps the top, we can kind of just like get a context of the game and then
Sure.
go sort of, move through it. I don't think it's important to look at a lot of it, but it's just interesting to note that I have a very typical opening blunder here. I think if I recall correctly, this game I was playing at like 6 in the morning, and so I was really, really quite tired.
Right.
But so I ended up running into some problems here with Queen B3, and I'm dropping a pawn or maybe even two.
Mm.
And so that's a wonderful way to start off the game
Oh, yeah.
at 6 or 7 in the morning. Um, and so I'm kind of irritated, but I suppose if I had to put a theme on this, it would be something like, hey, did you ever read that blog post called, I think it's called like Infinite Resistance or something like that?
Didn't read a blog post, but
It's
I know
really,
that this is something that uh, the guy who wrote Chess for Zebras talks about. Uh,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I read a blog post about it. I don't know who, and actually I was trying to find it, but it doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know who wrote it. Maybe it was the same guy. But infinite resistance, the theory is basically that you just keep putting up resistance to your opponent, and eventually you're going to find somewhere where you can hold as
Yeah.
long as you're applying resistance continually. And so this is a really nice mindset to have if you're down in a position, because you're just restructuring what your goals are. Your goal is no longer to win the game. And I think whenever you're down in a position, it's really important that you take that mindset, because the game is now out of your control,
Mm,
and all you can do is play good moves and hope your opponent makes a mistake.
yeah.
Um,
It's a tough
and
mindset to
that's
get
really
into
important
though
for me.
when say in this position
Oh
here,
yeah,
if you're losing a pawn early on, I know that my first reaction is to say, "Oh well, that's over," and sort of let's move on to the next game kind of thing.
definitely, definitely. It's definitely difficult, but it's an important mindset to have, especially if you're me, because then you're losing pawns out of the opening frequently.
Yeah.
So, yeah, something you're gonna have to get used to. And yeah, it's not easy to do, but I actually think it's a skill. And this is something I struggled with whenever I was first starting off, was I would go down a pawn in a game,
Hmm.
and I'd be like, oh no, I'm losing. And so I would immediately begin to look for counter chances, and I would find some ridiculous combination that I would calculate that it does not work and I'm losing a piece, but I just play it anyways, and I hope that my opponent doesn't play the combination correctly, and I
Right.
come out on top. And so instead of just being down a pawn, I'd lose the game immediately. And yeah, so that actually, like, just breaking myself of that and realizing, wait a second, I don't have to, like, just jettison myself out of the airplane. I can continue to try to play down a pawn and try to fight on the position, was actually really, really important. And I mean, I think probably a lot of people around here know that, but it's interesting. It takes some, I think, just like grit, basically,
Yeah.
to decide that you're gonna keep playing the position hard. So in the position, okay, he gets his pawn, and now it's time to reorient yourself and be looking for counter chances, but also make sure that you're not getting too crazy and you're not just throwing the game away. So the game moves on. The moves are not incredibly important, but what is important is that I am just kind of trying to play the position relatively normally. I'm down a pawn, and it's a pawn that kind of matters, right? One of my central pawns.
Yeah.
But um, other than that, that's actually not really so bad. Down a pawn is not, too bad. Now, of course, it is actually awful, but you have to kind of play like it's not really that bad. So I'm improving my position, hopefully. All right, we're maneuvering to some sort of middle game, and at some point, I cannot contest him in the center, so I need to start playing on the king side, because it's really my only chance is to drum up some sort of counterplay. But unfortunately, I have to do it quite slowly, so we are going to try to create some weaknesses, and we're continuing to improve on the king side. And finally, we're going to zoom past a lot of this, as my opponent is able to neutralize all of my king side attack, and I am finally left in an awful, awful end game right here. So I have the exchange. That's nice. But I'm down 4 pawns for the exchange,
Yeah.
which is a lot of pawns.
Yeah.
So it's not really that easy to defend. But once again, we just have to keep trying and giving our best. Bishop to c4 blocking. Here, b5 was a really, really strong consideration. But the trouble ends up being that his pawns are just too quick. For instance, like b5, I think one of the main situations was takes. If I push a4, I think b6 was a really, really big problem for me. Something like this, I believe. Although yeah, I think this was an issue. But so anyways, fixing some problems. Now I do play b5, and we do get into this position where I am making some progress. And finally we reach this position. So finally I've kind of gotten some pawns back by trying to play as tenaciously as I can, and we are now in this position. There's kind of a really interesting decision here about where was it at? Oh, it was right back here, where I could go after this pawn in some variation, and try to get the bishop, or I could um what was it exactly? Oh, okay, this was it. Rook d4, going after the a4 pawn,
Hmm.
or I go after this one and we lose that. But I ended up going for the D pawn because it's passed, and
Yeah.
secondly, it leaves my opponent with the light square bishop, which is a lot more stable of an endgame for black. So black is going to have a hard time losing this. Um, but also because this bishop is anchoring the pawn, I'm going to have a hard time winning as well. But I've gotten into something that's just, relatively reasonable, which is
Right.
nice.
Can we just back up a bit just
So,
to
yeah,
the
sorry.
the the critical position where when you're deciding on going after the d pawn. So yeah, I guess not.
Oops, jeez.
Oops.
Okay, wow. All right, sorry. And here we are now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here, um, so that d pawn is entirely lost. Why did he even bother to play d5?
Well, I'm guessing that he wanted to exchange a pair of pieces.
Okay, so he was happy with trading the knight for the bishop.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem is if you lose it now, then you're also losing the A pawn.
I
So,
see. Right.
like,
Right.
yeah, so you do this. Now the A pawn's also dropping. So yeah, you want to get rid of the bishop so that you aren't able to concentrate fire on the A4
Right.
pawn.
Right. Right. So he has
Right.
to get your bishop off the board, but it comes at the expense of his knight, which is the interesting piece to fight against your rook. Right.
Yeah, and if he keeps the knight on, I mean, this actually becomes, I mean, probably still good, but this pawn is going to be kind of weak,
Yeah.
and it's going to be a little bit difficult. Um, but yeah, so it's probably best. I think D5 is probably best,
Yeah. Okay.
for him. Okay, but now we're in this endgame, and so this was very interesting. And I always like to get to endgames like this because you can stop thinking about the game, uh, and so much calculation as more of like schemes. Um,
Well, especially when you're
trying
down
to
to
like
less than
figure out
two
what.
minutes, you pretty much have to rely on your sort of general understanding of the plan rather than on brute force calculation, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely the general. But even more so just thinking about like, where do I need to put my pieces? And you also just have all the time in the world here as black, which is kind of nice in terms of moves, but in terms of, time, maybe a little bit less. But so okay, I probably should try to improve my king, and so I'm gonna attempt to do that here. G5 comes through here, and this is kind of a scary. There was always these kinds of like ideas that maybe he's gonna start pushing, and will I be able to get back in time? But luckily they just don't really quite work out. After G5 comes through, um, now I do get to win this pawn. But actually, one of the really interesting moves here was he played G takes F6, which is just looking for a draw.
Mm.
But very, very interesting was G6, which is kind of scary. But I don't really think that there's much substance to it after F5.
Mm. Okay. Could we just step back and look at H5 again
Yeah,
instead of?
H5 is another good idea. But now the trouble is I just switch around this way. So at least like, okay, once again, is it working calculation wise? Not quite sure. But I do know that this is creating a ton of weaknesses.
Okay.
And I should be able to put my king here.
So he plays.
Also, there are ideas here of check,
Right. Right.
and I'm going to possibly get in like this, and then I will be able to return back with the rook to the back.
Right. Yeah. You've got time to get the pawn. Right. Yeah, and
Yeah,
the bishop
so it
doesn't
wasn't
control
quite
the
working.
queening square, so that's not.
That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, and now we've simplified it even further. And this was actually a position that I was kind of envisioning way back when I was debating about whether I should take the d pawn or let's actually I'm just gonna go what move on 56. I'm just gonna go back. In this position, had envisioned something like this, which was that if I exchange my minors here, and then I'm able to exchange his two pawns for this pawn, what will this endgame look like? Where he has his bishop, a pawn, and I have my rook and my king. And this is also kind of where knowing your endgames a little bit is kind of useful.
Yeah.
Where I knew that let's just go back to the game position. I knew that if there's no pawns, then my winning idea is to get him into this corner, or actually it's this corner, and then I would be trying to checkmate him. I have my king on G3, and I'd try to get some kind of checkmating idea, and it'd be based off of like double attacking the bishop, or maybe skewering the bishop to the back rank, and my opponent wouldn't be able to defend both threats. So I have
Now,
those kinds of ideas in the back of my head.
okay, now though the bishop
Um,
bishop versus rook is still a theoretical draw, but you're saying that
it
in
is, yeah. I
practical
have to
terms you
have
have chances.
well the winning idea, right? But the let's say that the critical position has my opponent's king in the corner. It's
Right,
the same color as my bishop,
right.
and my king is menacing it.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, I'm going to get some checkmate idea,
Mm-hmm.
which I know that I'm going to be able to get some kind of something like that if I can get my king to b4.
Right.
His king will have a hard time defending it. So we do end up getting our guys around here. This was a really interesting position. Once again, talking about uh, perpetual resistance, where bishop to b5 is a fortress, which is kind of crazy.
Hmm.
Because after king to b4, king to c1, king to c3, king d1, this is a little bit crazy, but
Oh, interesting.
um,
Yes.
yeah, the big problem here is, okay, I'm not pressuring the pawn,
Yeah.
so this bishop can move freely.
Yep.
And I never really have any checkmating ideas because he has squares, this
Yep.
square. I can't move my king over because he's controlling this square. And so from this position, he can actually kind of just play bishop a6, bishop b5.
Right.
And if I ever return back to attack the pawn again, he just defends it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I move my king back, there's no mating threats,
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
can't really make progress.
Yep. Yep.
So kind of a really, really strange looking fortress that I would not have been able to find in the game.
Yep.
Because it makes sense, you want to be in front of the pawn, you would think.
Yeah,
So king
exactly.
to a2, king c3, some kind of poor moves are made here. But we end up in the right kind of methodology. And now the problem is his king actually wants to be over here,
Yep.
um, where it's easier to, where it needs to be further away from the pawn, so my king cannot simultaneously threaten mate and threaten the pawn.
Yep.
And that's actually the trouble that he runs into. Bishop to c6, rook to h2, trying to find the right square, which if you've ever studied these endings, you know is kind of difficult. King c1, and now here is the cool move, which is rook to d8. And this is very, very typical
Oh,
of, like
yeah.
I said, the same theme in a without the pawns, with just a bishop and a rook. This is very, very typical. Where the idea is, of course, that I have some potential checkmating. That's why his king had to move over,
Yep.
so he doesn't get mated. Um, that's the and now with rook to d8, he has to stay on this diagonal to defend the pawn, but he has no more squares. As he does not have d7, he doesn't have e8, and c6 runs into the skewer.
Yep. Boy, that's a
Oh,
lovely move, rook to d8. And it requires you think a little bit out of the box, because the natural tendency is to say, I've got that king boxed up on the back rank there. I shouldn't leave the second rank. But that's just perfect.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and actually, I think he missed some drawing opportunities, in this whole exchange, which was interesting to me because I thought it was totally winning at the
Yep.
time. So I was like, nah, he doesn't have any draws, but evidently he did that I missed. Now the game concluded fairly easily after I'm able to pick up the pawn.
Yeah,
Um, it's all relatively simple. I just cannot let him get in front. I'm probably still winning that position, but there's no reason to let him get in
for
front of
sure.
the pawn
For
and
sure.
create problems for yourself. So yeah, then the game kind of wrapped up. But that was my only win of the tournament. So even which I started off losing. So you can guess how all the rest of my games went this
Yeah.
year. This
Oh, that's a lovely game though. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, the end game was very, very interesting, I
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah. That's the thing about end games, is that if you can get to an end game, you almost always have chances, because they're so deceptively simple, but often there are at least drawing chances in there, in some obscure variation somewhere. And not
Hmm.
that, and the fact that it's so easy
Yeah.
for your opponent, even with a hands down one end game to make an error because it still requires a lot of uh, a lot of good technique to convert a one ending into an actual win.
Yeah, yeah. And technique, I think, is the big thing there too.
Yeah.
I was debating whether or not to talk about technique, um, because I mean, that's something I struggle with a lot. And I think there are definitely some other players in the tournament who are way better at technique than I am. One that comes to
What do
mind
you mean
is
by technique
E3 engineer. I
precisely?
think has very good technique. Technique. Well, I would say, uh, well, this is kind of my own take on it, but I think there's like, well, you could call it like two kinds of players, or, and maybe at the top level, they kind of merge into one in a 50-50. But there's a player who tries to impose themselves upon the game. They try to, you know, play the game. And then there's other players who let the game play them. So what are you doing what's demanded of you in the position? And that's something I kind of struggle with. And normally I think it's whenever players have weaknesses in their game. And so for a long time for me, that was going to end games was very, very difficult for me because I don't think I played end games very well. So I would always be in these very, very, swashbuckling middle games and putting myself at unnecessary risk instead of just going into the end game. Versus technique, I would classify as doing what the position requires.
Hmm.
Um, and regardless of whether or not it's like how you would like to be doing the position.
Right, right. I see what you're saying.
um and I think that's a big transition, and it kind of comes in with that perpetual resistance. You go down a pawn, okay, play the game, play what the position requires of you, do what the position requires of you. And so I think E3 is normally pretty good at that,
Yeah,
playing
yeah, yeah.
technical
He's very clean.
and not being too ambitious.
Yep, yep.
Not like
Huh.
me. I'm too ambitious sometimes.
Yeah, well, we all have our flaws.
But that's something I'm working on.
Yeah. Well, I should talk to you because my personal weakness I think is not being ambitious enough. And so maybe I could learn something from you.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe you might learn the wrong thing.
Oh dear. Well, it can't be worse than what I'm doing right now, put it that way. All right. Well, listen, Gus, we spent, I guess, nearly half an hour here, so why don't we wrap it up here,
Oh
and
goodness.
we'll have another chat
Alrighty.
at some other time. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you and everybody else who's been willing to talk to me. It's sort of a goofy thing that we're doing here, but it's sort of fun at the same time.
I think it's nice. I think people enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I hope so. All right. Thanks again, Gus, and we'll see you in the next event, I guess. And to everybody
Alrighty.
else,
I'll see you there. Thank
yeah,
you.
and I'm same to everybody else. I hope you enjoy the last games if you still got games to play, and we'll see you in the next tournament. Bye bye for now.